Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about how a big, reliable July Nintendo Direct rumor just happened. So this rumor is coming from Nate the Hate, who is considered to be a pretty credible industry insider. Now, they do not get everything right, no one gets everything right. If you pay attention to these things over the years, you would know there is literally no one out there that gets everything right. So of course, still take this with a grain of salt. However, when it comes to Nintendo Direct presentation timing, Nate the Hate has pretty much always been very good about this. Even when it seemed most unlikely that he would be right, he has been right. Most recently, he had talked about the Nintendo Switch 2 First Look trailer happening at the same time, or on the same day as Donkey Kong Country Returns HD coming out, and that's exactly what happened. Even when it didn't seem to make sense to most people, he was accurate. And so with that in mind, when it comes to speaking on Nintendo Direct presentation timing, Nate the Hate is pretty reliable. And so recently, he put out a podcast, and he had talked about how he was going to record a podcast soon, and many people, myself included, were speculating if this had to do with some sort of Nintendo Direct happening soon. And, well, yes, it is, however, not as soon as we would have liked. So he reported during his podcast earlier today that there will be a Nintendo Direct, from what he has heard, happening in the month of July. However, it will be after the release for Donkey Kong Bonanza, which at this point seems pretty obvious. Of course, he recorded this beforehand where it may not have been so obvious. We're talking about this on a Monday, July 14th. Bonanza comes out on July 17th. Reviews are going to come out fairly soon, and then we're going to have this game. Nintendo's been focusing almost all their promotional efforts on Bonanza as of late. This is their big focus right now. It makes sense to think that there will not be a Direct in this week. But according to Nate the Hate, there will still be a Nintendo Direct in this month of July, which coincides with several other people who have also indicated a Direct will still be happening in this month of July. All of which we have reason to believe have some level of credibility, have inside sources, so there's a few people suggesting this. And there's actually a variety of angles to consider here when it comes to this Direct presentation. But the biggest one is, when is this presentation going to happen if it hasn't happened yet and it's not happening this week when Bonanza's coming out? Well, next week I would say is unlikely, perhaps even more so than this current week, and that's because not only are we getting Super Mario Party Jamboree plus TV Set Switch 2 Edition, and there will also be reviews for that I'm sure, but also earlier in the week on July 22nd, we are getting the next Pokemon Presents, which effectively is a Pokemon Nintendo Direct. If it was just the Pokemon Presents, if it was just Mario Party Jamboree, then I would say maybe Nintendo can squeeze a Direct presentation in that same week. But because we're already getting both, I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see a Direct next week, which only leaves one last final week in the month of July, which is not even a full entire week. But Nintendo has had late month presentations before, a handful in fact over the last year or so this can definitely happen. And as we've talked about repeatedly over the last few weeks, there is absolutely a need, not to just give us info on games we already know about coming from Nintendo, like release dates for Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, gameplay for Kirby Air Riders, the release date for Metroid Prime 4, but also about every single third-party game that hasn't been given any info yet. There's a variety of third-party games we know are supposed to come out this year that still don't have a release date, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Elden Ring Tarnished Edition, but there are so many other games that are unannounced that we are expecting announcements for. Why haven't they happened yet? There was none at Summer Games Fest. And so considering nothing has happened yet, we have to assume that a lot of announcements are being saved for a Direct presentation, and because it's already been a few months since the last wave of big third-party games were announced for Switch 2, you gotta think that something has to happen fairly soon. And of course, if Nintendo has any new titles of their own that they have planned for this holiday, then they probably would need to announce them in this upcoming Nintendo Direct presentation. And so it's for that reason that I'm thinking that we were not going to have to wait all the way until September for a Direct presentation. Maybe it does somehow happen in August, that's possible, but I do feel like the longer Nintendo waits, the more they're kind of hurting themselves here in terms of carrying over momentum from the launch of Switch 2. Now, if you've gotten to this point and you do find yourself enjoying my content, I'd like to point out that I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers, so your subscription would be appreciated. But let's try and dive a bit deeper into this situation, because a lot of the conversation about when this Direct would happen, many people were saying that there was no way it would be happening before Bonanza. And obviously at this point, that's not what's happening, but many people were thinking it could happen early in the month, myself included. And so taking a look at the history of Nintendo Directs and when big Nintendo games would be coming out before or after these presentations, let's take a look at this Nintendo Direct that happened at E3 2021, which took place on June 15th. We had actually seen that Game Builder Garage had come out just a few days before this Direct presentation, and Mario Golf Super Rush came out a few days after the presentation. So, in this scenario, we had two published Nintendo titles coming out before and afterwards. But how about the following Direct on September 23rd? Well, here we have WarioWare Get It Together. It came out a couple weeks before the Nintendo Direct. Looking at the February Direct to start 2022, there were no games that launched around that period of time, so it doesn't really matter too much. But going more forward, the September 13th Nintendo Direct of 2022, Splatoon 3 came out a few weeks before that Nintendo Direct presentation, and then there was a physical release for Bayonetta that came out later into the month, but that's not as big of a deal. Considering the February 2023 Nintendo Direct, we saw the release for Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe and Metroid Prime Remastered a couple weeks after that presentation. Now, Prime Remastered was also shadow dropped during the presentation, but the physical release alongside Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe came out a couple weeks afterwards. With the June 2023 Nintendo Direct, all we saw that came out afterwards is Everybody Want to Switch, not really that much of a big deal. The September 2023 Nintendo Direct, looking at that, there was not really anything but the physical release of Pikmin 1 and 2, which was already coming out digitally beforehand in July, right before Pikmin 4. And then last year, for the June 2024 Nintendo Direct, what did we see come out around that period of time? Well, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD came out a little bit afterwards. And so really when you consider the history of games coming out before or after Nintendo Directs, kind of random to be honest with you. At first I maybe thought, well, maybe Nintendo waits for Nintendo Directs to happen after big games come out, and maybe there's something to that idea because we did see a September Direct came out after Splatoon 3 release, so there is a possibility there. Maybe that's something we can sort of attach some value to. Bonanza is a major release, not a small-time release, so in cases like that, when it's a major release, they want to focus more on marketing that major release, and then the Direct will happen. If it's more of a smaller game, then perhaps they will drop an announcement of that afterwards, and it can get a second wind of promotional material through the Direct presentation. But then I look at situations like with the September 4th, 2019 Nintendo Direct and how Link's Awakening Remake, a pretty substantial release that sold very well, came out a few days afterwards, a couple weeks afterwards. Maybe in more recent years, Nintendo's adopted the strategy of focusing on the bigger game first, then putting out a Direct presentation, but it also doesn't seem like a foolproof theory either. I think most likely it's going to seem kinda random moving forward. Now, another angle I want to get at here is just speaking on the different rumors about this Nintendo Direct, and I try to cover only people that have some record or some reason for us to trust them. And so currently, the people that we have on record for saying they've heard a July Nintendo Direct is happening is one, Beat 'em Ups, who is a very big Nintendo channel. They've talked about how they've been told that the Nintendo Direct will have the release date for Metroid Prime 4, which is obvious, but also a teaser for Animal Crossing in 2026, alongside some other third-party announcements. But then there's also John Hark, who has said they've also heard a Nintendo Direct should be happening in July. And he's also considered to be an industry-wide insider. He's reported on a variety of things like with Ubisoft and PlayStation things before they're actually announced. And then we have friend of the channel Attack the Backlog, who has a contact that has accurately told them about Nintendo Direct timings in the past and has also told them a Direct will be happening in July. So that's 3. And now today, officially on the record, Nate DeHate has said he has also heard a July Nintendo Direct is happening. So it's 4 different people that seem to have some level of credibility and some kind of connection to an inside source somewhere. And then the 5th one I'll bring up is Nash Weedle. And this is the one where I've seen a lot of people kind of freaking out about. So Nash Weedle on July 6th had said, so this week, this was the entire tweet, there was nothing else to it. We all assumed it had to do with the Nintendo Direct, and I'm pretty sure that's what it is. He has not denied that. However, a couple days later, he did say this during the week. A Nintendo Direct in July. Right now, this is how things are between the sources. 3 for this week, 2 last week. Nintendo, are you playing? And so later he expands how he has even more sources that have yet to clarify on what is happening. And so clearly here he put out some info that was saying that he has heard conflicting things. But people have taken a look at this and said, oh, Nash Weedle is fake, they are not real, they do not have legitimate sources. And I don't think this is fair to say in the slightest. One, when we're talking about people who have inside information, the people who actually have legitimate, consistent inside information, not just one source, they are going to have several sources, and if you are going to verify, confirm something, you are going to look at multiple sources and get verification. And Nash never said with 100% certainty a direct would be happening in the prior week. This wasn't one of his leak expresses or his reports that something is in the works. When we're talking about someone verifying and putting out reports, typically there needs to be several sources with confirmation. Just one source isn't really considered to be a good, credible report. That all said, if you want to consider this a ding in Nash Weedle's credibility, I think that's totally valid. But as I said at the very beginning of this video, no one gets everything right, and we have to consider everything that Nash Weedle hasn't getting right as of late. They told us about how Nintendo would be doing Switch 2 editions before everyone else. They told us about the mouse controls in Metroid Prime before anyone else. They told us about the Tarnished edition of Elden Ring before anyone else. They told us about Assassin's Creed Shadows coming to Switch 2 before we found the rating of it coming to Switch 2. Before anyone else. Before most people were talking about there being a 3D Donkey Kong in the Direct instead of a 3D Mario, the Switch 2 Direct in April, Nash Weedle was talking about it. And well in advance, Nash Weedle was talking about how there would be a free Switch 2 edition of No Man's Sky before anyone else. And it's not like they're getting a whole bunch of things wrong either. Yes, in the past they have not been totally correct, but they've also been correct about a lot of things as well, far more than what's been wrong. And so I point this out because I think it's important to consider the entire picture. When looking at the entire picture, at least currently, so far, Nash Weedle has still shown to be fairly reliable. Of course, whenever we talk about things, they are all considered rumors because until officially confirmed, well, you don't know for sure what it actually is. So you have to take it with a grain of salt, you have to be cautious. Of course, you're always going to have people that are going to be upset when things don't go their way. That's just the nature of the beast. But what do you all think of this Nintendo Direct situation? With the 5 different sources out there suggesting a Direct is still happening in July, do you believe it? Are you skeptical? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.